Welcome back to the Law
great.
School Toolbox podcast. Today is our 300th anniversary episode, and we're going to be talking about some questions we get pretty frequently. Your Law School Toolbox hosts today are Allison Monahan, that's me, and Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You might even be on a future show. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started.
Welcome back to this special anniversary episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast. Who can believe it? 300 episodes, a pandemic. It's just been a wild ride. 300. I can't believe it.
I can't believe it. I mean, I'm not sure we ever thought we'd do this many when we started, and here we are.
I wasn't sure anybody was going to listen to it when we started.
Right. I think we thought we might have 300 people listen total.
Maybe, if we were lucky. Oh my
We've
gosh.
got millions of downloads, literally.
Millions of downloads, which is very humbling. So thanks for listening. I love hearing that people listen to it. It's kind of exciting. And it's also very funny where people tell me that they listen to it. You know, I didn't think I'd be a good running companion, but apparently people listen to us on their runs, making dinner. The cooking one I could have guessed, but the commuting, but the running, I'm a big music runner. So the idea that you could run to the beat of our dialogue, I don't know, but I'm glad people do.
Maybe they speed it up like 2x.
Maybe. I don't know. We talk pretty fast already. I feel like if you took us at 2 speed, it would be pretty intense.
It'd be like the Chipmunks. Did you have that?
I know, right? Yeah. So it's a pretty cool milestone to beat, though. Considering we also have the Bar Exam Toolbox. So between those two, we have done a lot of podcasting over the last few years.
We really have. Yeah. So today we actually wanted to reflect on some of the things we've learned over the years of doing this and some listener questions, that kind of thing. So what are some things? I mean, one of the things I see over and over, and I think this makes a lot of sense, and I think it's actually a good thing for people to be thinking about. People are always wondering kind of how to start off strong in law school. You know, what do they need to do that summer before? What do they need to be thinking about? What have we learned about this?
Well, I think we've learned a lot, not only from developing, courses on this topic, like our Start Law School Right course, but also just talking to so many law students. And I think that we still believe that there's this push to overstudy. So you can spend the whole summer reading supplements and things like that. And I still think that's a terrible idea. I really do. After all these years of hearing all of these stories, I think that something like our Start Law School Right course that focuses on skills is a good idea, or practicing reading difficult material or learning something new to get your brain going. But starting off strong in law school is really not all about knowing law. It's really about showing up as kind of the best version of yourself with the skills needed to absorb what's being covered at school.
I think that's right. And I think there's actually a lot to that overall. I think oftentimes when we see people run into problems, they really have kind of over-focused on this idea that they just have to learn all of this legal trivia and they have to learn this material and memorize everything, they'll be fine. And that's kind of missing a pretty big step of what law school is actually about. Mm-hmm. And so, I think these people, people kind of come in and think oh, it's all about learning what a tort is. And of course that's important, but it's not really the goal here. That's only kind of the first step of the goal. So, I agree with you. I think you need to show up kind of as mentally and logistically prepared as possible, but there's really just very little point. And I remember I was doing some silly stuff. I was reading an unedited Supreme Court case on something. And it's just when did I ever do that again? They edit these things for a reason when you're there in your case books.
Yeah.
So, it was kind of cute. It was oh, I read a case, but it was literally 85 pages.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also really having your support network set up is so important, whether it be, having a good therapist that you're working with, especially if you struggle with things like anxiety, which really bubble up in law school. I think especially I mean, recently with the online law school, it seems that that's been a lot more triggering for folks because they don't have as great of a sense of community. But making sure that you have your support network and kind of that you feel like you've got a team behind you, whoever's in that team, whoever is going to help make your life happen. Because when those tricky moments inevitably come up, you need to be able to rely on folks to help kind of get you through. And at the beginning of law school, yes, you're going to make friends, but you don't have that immediate community. So you still want to rely on like the community that you have going into school, even if they aren't local. You can still speak to friends from home or rely on family or, someday I guess we'll be able to like go to gym classes or running clubs again. So a lot of people find community that way, but you have to just make sure that your whole person is being taken care of.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's easy to get so caught up in kind of the experience that people are just only studying. We talk to people who just have been studying like 12 plus hours a day in addition to going to class. They're not taking any time off. They've lost contact with everyone they used to talk to. And frankly, they're pretty miserable. And I just don't think that's a great way to go through life. And I don't really think it makes you typically that successful.
No, and I think that one of the things that I've really learned from these COVID times is how much of life and sanity are these simple pleasures.
Right.
I think for me personally, I've really noticed how social interaction, like in person with people I care about, is so important to me. Like you and I recently, being vaccinated, got to be together, and we haven't seen each other much at all for the last year plus. And it's like I get a lot just by being able to like have dinner with you, which is something that we used to do all the time. We would go to events and do stuff all the time, but like it kind of really like filled up my cup. And I think it really has shown me that these things that I oftentimes took for granted, that maybe I would have even eliminated from my life when I'd get stressed and busy, are actually very important to our mental health. And you need to be able to carve out time for them to, keep your life rolling. Also, life is uncertain, and you should still try and enjoy the life that you're living, even if you're trying to accomplish something hard like law school.
Right. And I think the people, who oftentimes do the best are not necessarily the most miserable. So I don't think, this idea that you have to suffer to do well is really actually that accurate. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's, some people who are suffering and end up with top of the class, but I don't actually think that that's really the case. I would guess there's very little correlation between people's like misery level and success level.
Yeah. Because the misery just leads also to like, we're going to talk about it in a minute, but like self-sabotaging behavior and like not sleeping. And, usually the misery doesn't help you perform at your best.
Right. When I was clinically depressed in law school, I don't think it was my best semester.
Right. Exactly.
Probably could have done better by avoiding that happening.
Yeah. But I think what we've also learned is that a lot of people start off with the best of intentions, but it all kind of falls apart as they kind of go through it. Yeah. And I think this happens for a lot of reasons. One thing we were just talking about is just time management. I think there's this idea that it's hours in equals outcome. So it's like if you are at the library from open to close, then you will get good grades. And that is just not how this works, because I had a lot of friends who were on academic probation who hung out at the library all the time. That doesn't mean that they were doing the things that they needed to do to get the good grades. So there are all these things you can do that really aren't leading you to manage your time well, that make you feel like you're being very productive, but you're not actually putting in the work that leads to the outcomes you're looking for.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Things like rereading cases 3 or 4 times, or like watching your lecture again, that sort of thing. You just don't really have time for that. And so I think, people can kind of choose their focus about what to spend their time on and spend it on the activities that are really going to get the most bang for the buck. And then hopefully that gives you enough spare time that you can do things like go on a walk, and like
cook a nice dinner.
Right, exactly. Because I think, you can't just kind of study in these ways that aren't very effective for years on end, and come out on the other side any sort of functional human being.
Yeah, I think that that's very true. And this leads right into something that we see all the time, which is people just start doing self-sabotaging behavior. And we've all been guilty of this. So it's not like I'm sitting, up here saying like, well, I never self-sabotage. Of course we all do. We've all been there. Not necessarily like maybe academics is not my self-sabotaging like area of my life, but like we all have our self-sabotaging behaviors. Like it's not,
exactly.
But like the things that we often see is this idea of kind of wasting time, doing busy work, but then also really, like moving near exam time, or not setting boundaries with family, or planning travel at inopportune times, or, not doing some damage control. So you're always in a crisis. My personal favorite is compulsive TV watching, which, hey, we all love a good Netflix binge, but maybe not in reading week. I think we've heard it. We've heard it all over the years. So you do have to kind of check in with yourself about these self-sabotaging behaviors. If you're not getting the outcomes that you want, you have to make sure that you're not, practicing habits that are working against you.
Right. And then you've got to kind of get at the underlying issue too. It's like if you're doing the self-sabotaging stuff, like why is this happening? Do you not want to be in law school? Do you have untreated anxiety disorders that are making you drink too much? Whatever these things are, you kind of got to get
I totally left the drinking off. That's a huge one in law school.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, if you're going to be functional, you kind of got to get to the bottom of this stuff. And, it's totally fine for people to walk away and say, yeah, this is making me miserable. I don't want to do it. That's completely legitimate.
Yeah. And I think this is where if you are struggling, like talking to a therapist, and a great reminder, we always say it, most law schools give you free therapy through
Take advantage.
University. Take advantage. And I think one of the things like I always love about checking in with a therapist, even if you don't go very often, is it is somebody who listens to you talk and then says something like, just hypothetically, not that this has ever been said to me, but, didn't you say this was your goal? And it doesn't seem to be that you're doing the things necessary to reach that goal.
Right. And you're like, huh.
And it's like,
good point.
And then you like backtrack. And it's like, there is some beauty to having someone on the outside saying like, do you realize your choices are not actually moving you towards that goal?
Right.
And I think that is something that, a therapist or a coach or a mentor, but whoever kind of calls you on that part of your life can be so effective because sometimes we can't see it ourselves. And then, having your self-sabotaging behavior called out can be really helpful in, shifting directions.
Right. Or at least making you recognize you're doing it. And then it's like, okay, I recognize that I made this poor choice to go out drinking the day before my exam. Maybe I'll learn something from this experience next time.
Yep. It is possible that my first semester, I think it was my second semester 1L year, I did go to a bachelorette party a couple days before my Civ Pro exam. I don't think that was a great choice. I had fun and I lightly drank. I put that in air quotes because at that time in my life, lightly drinking meant something much different than it means
not half a glass of wine,
which is not like a glass of wine. And then I remember the next morning being like, oh yeah, not my most productive self. Maybe not my best choice.
We all do things. It happens.
Exactly. I was young. So I think another issue that comes up, even if you have good intentions, is that you're really not focusing on the end game. You don't understand the expectations and how these exams are graded in the beginning. And so you're allocating your time to all the wrong things.
Right. Which ends up being self-sabotaging when you take your exam and you realize you never actually did a practice test because you ran out of time.
Yeah, exactly. So, these are the things that you just kind of have to watch for and check in with yourself. If you, don't have a mentor or you don't have a professor that you've bonded with or academic support or a therapist or a coach or whoever, a tutor, whoever that you're checking in with, you have to kind of check in with yourself to make sure that these kind of accidental missteps aren't happening. So if you're it's Friday and you're looking at the weekend and you're like, I have so much work to do over the weekend. There's no way I can go on that hike with a friend. And there's no way I can go to that birthday party. And I'm drowning in work. And you're in the first month of the semester. You got to check yourself and say, why am I drowning in work?
Right.
Because you shouldn't be drowning. Now, you should be busy, but you shouldn't be drowning in work at that point.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the problem people run into too is they start to fall behind. And then once you fall behind, you're in this kind of vicious cycle of like you really are in trouble at that point. But I think you're right. You know, if you're in the first weeks of school, like, yes, of course, it's going to seem like there's a lot of work and it's very intense and you're spending a lot of time doing these things. I mean, sometimes people have to laugh because I'm spending all of my time working. And then you actually ask them about, you know, okay, well, what did you do yesterday? And it turns out they did like 3 hours of reading and they think this is totally abnormal. I'm like, that's not abnormal for law school. You're in law school.
That's like what you do.
Yeah. Like, I'm sorry, you're going to be doing this every day. That doesn't mean you're drowning. That's what you do.
Right. Exactly. And it can be exhausting in the beginning because you're not used to it, you know.
Like, of course, it's not easy, but you know, if you're like, you know, reading 15 hours a day just to keep up with classwork, like that's too much.
Right. Or if you can't move your schedule around to go to a birthday dinner for a friend, then that's like another warning sign. Like you should be able to find time. You can't go out every night, but like if you want to go out on a Friday night to a birthday dinner for a friend, you should be able to work your schedule around it. And if you don't have that time, then you need to evaluate like what you're doing because you should have time to do things like that.
Right. And that stuff is important, like you said.
Yeah. I think another thing that often gets lost is like why people are actually in law school. This is a question I often ask law students if I can't clearly figure it out by talking to them, or even bar takers will have this conversation when they're complaining about the bar. And I'll be like, why do you want to be licensed in X jurisdiction? Like, what is your goal? You know? And I think to the point where we've even in the past had students write letters to themselves about why they want to be in school. Like, why are they doing this? And I think it's important to check in with yourself about why you're there so you can put up with this nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is everyone's going to run into some sort of struggles. And the more that you can say, oh, you know, I'm here because this is the goal that I'm trying to achieve, or this is what's motivating me, I think getting in touch with that underlying motivation. And again, if it's not there, it's not there. And that's like something to think about is how did I end up in this position? You know?
Yeah.
And what am I going to do about it?
Yep. So still after all these years, after all the blog posts, all the podcast episodes, all the curriculum we developed, you know, how to do law school, the process, the outlining, the exams still seems to be such a mystery to so many people. So why do you think it is so hard to demystify this experience for folks?
Well, I mean, that is what we're trying to do.
That is our whole business model, really?
Literally, we're going to demystify it for you. Well, I think some of what's going on is people have to, you know, it's kind of this balance of you have to figure out what works for you, but there are also things that you have to do. And you can do them in different ways, but they're kind of these big chunk-like things of knowledge. You know, first you have to know some law. Like you can't do a law school hypo if you don't know some law. So there are different ways that people can think about learning that and think about putting it together and make sense of it. But you have to do that piece. And so, you know, I can't tell, like, even you, I can't be like, well, this is exactly how you should learn the law. Like, you have to process that for yourself. But I can tell you what your goal is, and I can give you a lot of different ideas, and you can try them out, and I can help you figure out if they're working. You know, so it's kind of this back and forth.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's just tricky. I mean, I think it's so foreign to what most people have done in the past. You know, so many of these, like I went to a liberal arts college where I wrote lots of papers.
Right.
You know, it's just, this isn't what I did. And I was even from a family of lawyers and it still felt very foreign. It's just different. It's a tough thing. And you have to go in with this growth mindset, something we also have been talking about since the very beginning of this podcast, is you got to be willing to change what you do and learn and grow and fail. And that's not easy.
Yeah, and I think the people who have the most resistance to this idea that they need to do something differently or learn something or change, you know, the more rigidity you have around what you already know and what you're already comfortable with, I think typically the harder it is for you. You know, we talked about Dan Siegel and, you know, this idea of like the river where you're kind of bouncing between like rigidity and chaos. And I think for a lot of people, that kind of is their experience.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, I mean, I definitely remember some points of feeling like super overwhelmed and stressed out and just like treading water and not really sure I was going to get everything all done. And that's not a great way to exist. And it probably wasn't my most productive self.
Right. Now, I remember one day where I had like so much stuff to do. I was like a 2L or 3L, I can't remember. But I had like, maybe it was a 1L. Anyway, I had like so much stuff to do. You know, I was scheduled from like 7 in the morning until like 10 o'clock at night. And it was like all really important stuff. And then I woke up in the middle of the night with like the worst food poisoning in my entire life. Ugh. And it was just that moment of like, oh, okay, I'm obviously not doing any of this. I ended up like getting an IV at the student health center later in the day. And then like I got called on in like 2 different classes. You know, it was just one of those things. Like in the end, nothing happened.
Right.
It was fine. I missed everything. Right. Like life went on.
It's true. Yeah, life goes on. And I think that there is, there's this issue for law students who tend to have some sort of perfectionist parts of their personality to feel like there's just no room for stumbling or failure. But like life happens. Sometimes you get sick. And, I think that one of the things that COVID times has really taught us is the importance of health, right? We only have our health. We're basically spending all of our time trying to protect our health and the health of others. And even more than it used to be, like if you get sick, like you can't go to class.
Right. If you don't show up if you have a cough.
Right. I mean, like I remember every time I hear like one of my children sniff, I'm always like, do you have a runny nose? What's wrong? You can't go to school if you have a runny nose. But it used to be like, oh, you don't have a fever.
You're fine. It's a low grade fever. Send them on over.
I know, right? Like we've become so hyper aware that, life happens. But I also think that maybe all of us have gotten conditioned a little bit better to realizing that life does happen. And that sometimes we just have to roll with it.
Yeah. And the reality is, if an exam goes poorly, like that's disappointing. You can feel disappointed about it. That is not going to ruin the entire rest of your life. That's just not the way this works.
It is true. I will be honest. I remember after it was my second year, I think it was my one semester final. I can't remember. And it was my First Amendment class. So it must have been second semester, First Amendment class. And my computer crashed during the exam. And I then had a dinner planned with girlfriends who were not in law school because that was my last exam. And I was a wreck. Oh my gosh. I mean, I was like super dramatic. I was, oh, you don't understand, guys. If this test goes poorly, my GPA, like like on and on and on and on. And now maybe it's possible I was slightly overdramatic. And it's possible one of my girlfriends called me on that. And I was like, you just don't understand.
And they're like, it's a test. You'll live.
She was a vet at that point. And she was like, I think it's going to be okay. Not life or death. Don't really know what you're talking about.
Yeah, like no animals are dying right now. You're
yeah,
cool.
No animals, no people. Like it'll be fine. Whatever. You're smart. I'm sure you figured it out. But yeah, so there is that too of just trying to ride the waves a little bit more, and that's part of life is getting better at riding, I think, these waves because life is complicated. And when you go out into the workforce, life is still going to be complicated and you're going to have to figure out how to balance all of this stuff.
Absolutely.
School is simple in that way. Often your life is not as complicated as it will be later in life.
Oh, that's for sure true. I mean, I feel like people who like absolutely cannot handle law school, I'm always just sort of wondering, how are you going to handle like being at trial as a lawyer?
Yeah.
Like that's going to be way more intense than this.
Yeah. And usually as we age, we then become responsible for more things. So it's like, not only are you going to be like a responsible lawyer, but maybe you'll have a partner or children or dogs, or you'll be responsible for a friend or a nephew or a niece, or like, life just gets
and you'll have
more
clients,
complicated.
They want stuff.
And clients that want stuff. It's like life just gets more complicated. So it's not a bad thing. It just does.
Right.
So you got to be able to manage all the things in your sphere.
So law school is good practice.
It is. So let's talk about job stuff.
Another ongoing mystery to people.
Ongoing mystery. It's still hard for people to figure out what lawyers do during the day and how big law is different from other types of practice, public interest versus kind of more for-profit corporate stuff. I mean, I still get questions. People will be like, well, when you practice, what do you do? what did you do? And I will say like, oh, I did like corporate defense. And then there's some follow-up question. And then I like answer that. And then it's like crickets. Like,
right.
Like there's no more information, but nobody still really understands what that means. Like, what did I do? But the day-to-day stuff is I like mostly read doc review and wrote responses to motions. That's really like what I did.
Yeah.
And some pro bono work.
I think people just really have very little concept of what the day-to-day of any type of lawyer. I mean, unless, you grew up with lawyers, so you had some idea what they did. But again, like it's all very specific,
Yeah. I mean, I knew what like my dad did, but like I couldn't have told you what like non-criminal lawyers did.
Right. And then, it's like this everything is so niche that, I met someone and they're like, oh, you did patent stuff. I'm like, no, I was a patent litigator. I didn't write patents. That's like a totally different thing. I don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
No, but you did patents. It's like, no, not the way you think of it.
Right. Yeah. Like litigating them is different than
like, I was fighting about it after the fact. I was not preparing the application.
Right. Totally different.
Yeah. And so I think, you just like, it's very hard to kind of get like, what do people even do? And then, how do you find out or figure out what you would like to do when you literally don't even know what most lawyers are doing?
And I think this is what's interesting about content we developed like way in the early days about informational interviews. And that one of your goals in law school should be to meet as many people doing interesting things as you can and trying to learn about what they do. Because I think there are so many interesting types of law that you may not even know will resonate with you. But then I just had someone that I knew in law school leave her family law practice, which she hated. And that's not to say everybody, I have another friend who's a family law attorney who loves it. She thrives in it. This person it was probably 10 years of her life and she was miserable.
Oh, that's awful.
And I know, I'm happy for her that she left and is now trying to pivot to something totally different. But it's also just kind of sad to think that she spent that much time being that unhappy. And I wonder if she had asked more questions when she was in law school or tried out a few more internships or changed jobs earlier, pro bono, that maybe she would have learned, hey, this is not good stuff for me. I should do something else. Because a lot of it's just finding fit.
Yeah, I mean, when I left Big Law, I strongly considered starting a family law practice. And I did an informational interview with this woman who was a very successful, like, solo family lawyer. She was great. She was totally willing to, like, take me under her wing, mentor me. She's like, this is fantastic. You'd be great. And so I did a pro bono divorce case. Holy wow. I was like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I was like, this is not something I want to wake up and do every day. But like, good that I did that.
Yeah, exactly. You saved yourself a lot of time, energy, money,
I spent
everything.
3 years working on that one case pro bono. But hey, it was better than trying to do it full time forever.
Yeah. Exactly. And some people really thrive in that environment. You got to like ask questions. Yeah. About like conflict and, meeting people when they're in crisis. And are you okay? Some people thrive being around people in crisis. Some people don't. You got to figure out who you are. Yeah.
And I was also just like, wow, family law court is really different from like federal patent court.
Oh, yeah.
I was just like, this is a whole different world. And it is not one I want to be in.
Yeah. I know.
Like, this is chaotic.
Yeah. I mean, it's totally crazy. So you've really got to like learn. And so I think that the best advice we can give is just always be learning, asking questions.
Like, try things.
Try things.
Don't commit to them. Just try them.
Go to coffee, talk to people, like it's, I think it's just really important to learn as much as you can so you can have a picture of what these jobs really look like. Because it's not all just about how much money you can make. If you're miserable, it doesn't really, most of the time, matter how much money you make. You're not going to be hugely successful if you're really unhappy and if it's a bad fit.
Because there are those people who do love what they're doing and the same thing you're doing, and they will be out, working morning to night and loving every second of it. And like, they're the ones who are going to be like thriving. Yeah.
I remember when I think it was my summer at my big law firm, we did a talk with this woman who had been a partner at this firm for many, many years. And this firm did corporate defense, products liability defense, a lot of medical device, toxic tort, all of this stuff. So basically her whole career was taking like depots of people who were hurt or had lost somebody or who were like dying or it's like sad stuff, right? But she was talking about it and she was like, this is how you act like you're sympathetic without admitting anything. And I remember just sitting there being like, cool. I don't know if I want to, like, do I want to do that?
You're like, this sounds kind of horrifying, but you seem to be good at it.
I know. I mean, I get that there's like a dance to this, and I respected her dance to it. I respected that she kind of like had her way to move through the process. Now, one could say that as a summer, if I'd gone to that talk, that maybe I should have like thought more about it before I accepted a job at that firm doing exactly that type of work. But I don't think I was that wise at that age. And so I just took my job offer and I was happy about it. And I went about my life and then left and did something else. So, but you should really listen when people talk about what they do at these jobs and make sure you want them.
Right. You're the classic one. Like, no one ever asked when we said we're going into litigation if you like arguing. It's like kind of a critical question to ask yourself.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. Yeah. All right. Well, the other thing that's been going on in the world, of course, is COVID. And when auditing kind of what we've been talking about, we've done a lot of episodes since the 250th episode, which was about COVID. This came up, the COVID was episode number 236, March 24th, 2020. Wow, we've talked a lot about COVID for a long time.
Yeah, at first I was like, I'll go back to 250 and see how many times we've mentioned COVID. And I was like, oh, wait, these were not even the first ones we did. Got to go back further in time.
I know, which is crazy. So I'm hopeful that we are going to not have to talk about it as much as the world hopefully opens up. But I also hope that we don't lose some of the lessons we learned. And I think law school and the bar exam might be forever changed by COVID. It'll be interesting to see how it continues to play out.
It will be interesting. I mean, I'm just hopeful we might soon have some bandwidth for thinking about other things.
I know.
We'll see.
I know. Exactly. Yeah. And then there are topics we're surprised people don't talk to us about more, like financial stuff.
I'm always surprised. Like, we get a few questions of people writing in saying like, hey, I'm considering these two options. Like, I have money at school X and not at school Y. Like, what do you think we should do? I mean, I'm like, hey, I don't know you at all, but here's what I might think about.
Right.
But like beyond that, people just really don't ask these questions, at least not to us. I mean, I don't think we've ever gotten a question about student loans, for example.
No. And like, that's such a huge issue. And we do sometimes get questions about, should I go into debt to go to this school or take a scholarship at this school? Like how much debt should I incur? But I think there's a lot about the realities of student loans and student loan forgiveness and what it really looks like to pay off loans that's not very commonly discussed. I just did a guest episode with a friend of mine who's a financial coach. And when we were talking about all these decisions around finances and how people think about money and how as a student you should start thinking about this stuff. And then it was a great reminder how we don't talk about this stuff as often because people don't raise the questions to us. But it's so critical to life stability to have your finances figured out.
Yeah. And I mean, the reality is having these enormous debt like has such an impact on your life. And I feel like that's one of those things people just kind of like sign up for.
Yeah.
So, I think do your research. Yeah, like think about this stuff.
Interest rates. Oh my gosh. Like I had different loans that ended up getting locked in at these very different rates. And I can't even remember how many years after. I was like, when did I graduate from law school and get married? I got married like a couple years after law school. And part of getting married is you sit down with your partner, or if you haven't done this, I would recommend doing this. And you look at your financial landscape together. And I was like, okay, well, I have this student loan at this interest rate and this student loan that's locked at this interest rate. And he's like, what interest rate is that first one at? And I was like, this interest rate? And he's like, that's terrible. Yeah. He's like, we should not, that should not be, we should figure out how to get out of that, And I was like, I'm like, it just, because I kind of accepted that was just the interest rate that loan was at. He's like, no, we can come up with a plan to get you out of that loan. Like, let's come up with a plan. And, I'm kind of embarrassed that I didn't sit down and do that for myself.
Yeah. I think it's just, you just sign up and then it just like comes out of the bank account and you never really think twice about it. But I think it's something worth thinking about. I mean, there's a lot of money that most people are borrowing to go to law school.
Yes. Any final thoughts as we wrap up? I know we're almost out of time. 300 episodes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my final thought is we got 300 episodes you can listen to. So almost anything that you're interested in, we've probably covered at some point. I will say there are definitely topics we would like to cover more. And, we're thinking about and like working towards covering more. But we do have a lot of content on like a lot of this stuff. So, go and do some research. We have a list of all 300 episodes in order. We also have them like sorted out by category. So you can go back in time and, hear our thoughts in the beginning of the pandemic when I think we're freaking out.
Yes, I was definitely freaking out in March of 2020. I also really want to encourage people to send in questions because we do read them and they get put on a list and we talk about putting them in podcast episodes. So I really encourage people, if they have stuff they're wondering about, that they should send in notes to us. We are like humans that read these notes, and it means a lot to us to hear what people are thinking about. I think too, one of the other things that I hope we talk more about, but I also would like people to think more about, is just professionalism. That would be my other thing that I was thinking about today when I got an email from someone that I didn't find was particularly professional. And I think I forwarded you that email.
You did.
I did.
I was like, that is pretty funny. Wouldn't have sent that.
Right, exactly. And so I think that in this world, especially in COVID, but even as we go back to normal, this professional persona and how you communicate in writing and email over text. I'm the worst about text typos. That's like something I really have to work on because autocorrect and I are not friends. And thank goodness that most of the people I text don't judge me based on my text messages. But I think that that's another thing I hope we talk about a little bit more going forward. I know you and Sadie talk about it some in the job context. But one of the things to work on as you're in law school is just what is going to be your professional voice and your professional persona, because that's a big part of who you are as a lawyer and what's coming up next in your career.
No, I think that's a great point. It's a good time to practice, just like everything else in law school. This is basically the practice that doesn't have that many repercussions, hopefully.
Yeah, make sure the awkward emails get sent to people without consequences.
Well, the other thing I've noticed too is sometimes people are dictating into like text and stuff, and like a lot of the times it's just not a really direct translation of what you want to say. So you got to check those, because sometimes I get like, what in the world is this?
I know, it can be so weird. And then I also had the thing happen on a text exchange yesterday that autocorrect, I can't even remember what the word was, but we were texting each other and autocorrect kept doing the wrong word to each of us. Like the word we were choosing, they were so like mine had an error to her and then hers had an error back to me because autocorrect was working against us. So you have to even proofread your text messages.
Yeah, no, that happens a lot. I'm like, no, I actually meant to type what I typed, not what you just changed those three words to.
Right. And it's not just duck. It's other things too.
Probably not. Yeah.
Not just duck. Oh, well, anyway. All right. Well, thanks for listening. Here's to the next 300.
Woo, that's hard to conceive of, but maybe we'll still be here.
Exactly. All right. Well, with that, we're out of time. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.